Who's heard of 101? I suppose that's not a bad thing. Yeah, I was just going to go through 101 and where it came from, how it started, what it consists of, what it is, what it isn't, and introduce some of the people who've been involved with it and the work that we've been doing. So this is my background. I think I beat Mikhail by about 2 years. I started in '78, so just a couple of years. But interestingly enough, how many other people than Mikhail and I were around when the old panels were around? Less and less every year, I guess. But I was one of the wave of engineers that came in, and we were responsible for getting rid of all of those old panels and replacing it with this new thing called a DCS. And it was easy then, because DCSs had black screens, and that's all you had. Black screens and whatever you could put on it, and however you could program it to work. So you had to program black over colors so that the lines blanked out and stuff like that, and you only had like about 10 colors to work with or whatever it was. But so things have changed, and now we have the opposite. We can actually do almost anything with a screen. We can have as many colors as we want. We can do whatever we want. We can program the screens, and sometimes we do. And so, somewhere on there is a guy with a bare chest who's touching his left shoulder with his right hand. Can you see where he is? There he is. Now imagine if you're an operator and you've got to make a decision that quickly with that kind of information. Because that's, coming back to what someone said earlier, like Larry showed. This is the way graphics were back then. And it's the way a lot of them are still today, by the way. But the interesting thing is, you've got green and red on there. Does green mean on and off? Does red mean on or off? Is red on, or is it an alarm? So that's the kind of thing we were faced with when we started the standard back in 2006. Is this a good? If anyone says this is a good display, I'm going to throw you out of the room. So.
It's a good display on not to.
Yes. Yes. So this is actually, this was something I just picked up as I've gone through. But funnily enough, I've actually been around the room in the back there, and there's still some of those in there, even with the new systems. Hopefully they're demo systems, just to show the capabilities of the machines, and they're not going to be expected for operators to run the plants with. That's what I'm praying, because that is definitely not a good display. The interesting thing is you can't even see the information that the operator's supposed to see. All you can see there is a gaping hole in the middle there with all those flames. And in some of these displays, the flames are actually in motion. And what on earth use is that? I mean, we all know flames work. What we were interested in is how the process is running. I'm just going to go through this quickly. So basically, there was a call for a standard because you're coming across all of these different things in the industry. The thing where is red off or is red an alarm? Should you have a black background? Should you have a white background? Should it be a grey background? Should you have different colored vessels? Whatever, So we had a need for a standard. And we got the different perspectives. From the user perspective, they've got to live with it. They've got to operate it. Integrators have to design it. And suppliers like us have to develop software and systems for these users and integrators. And it was confusing. It was confusing, and it still is confusing in many cases. So what we wanted to do with the standard was to address this issue, provide guidance. And it was very confusing, and I'll show you in a second how we kind of went through the standard development. I actually joined it 2 years in. It was already 2 years underway when I joined, and we were all over the place. And we decided to go for a lifecycle approach. We thought, well, how can we manage this? And we looked back at S84, and we looked back at S18.2, ISA 18.2, the alarm standard. S84 is the safety standard. Both of those have lifecycle approaches. And we thought, well, what's the best thing for an HMI is to have a life cycle approach. So from design all the way through to decommissioning, but also across it some system standards like things you will do as part of that HMI development. But we got into an interesting situation as well with the standard itself. Like, we decided in the end we wouldn't define what you should do, we defined what you shouldn't do. Because we got into all kinds of a mess on colors, for instance. You go out there and you ask people, what do you think about colors? And you get about 600 emails come in. I had to put a rule in my Outlook when we did the color thing because there were so many emails coming in about, well, I think it should be this, I think it should be that. So what we did say was, in the standard, you shouldn't do this. So that's the what. The technical reports that we're going to talk about later, they're going to tell you suggestions about how you should do it. So the standard itself got condensed. It was quite big at first, but it got condensed to it's only about 65, 70 pages, which is quite good. But the scope was to address HMIs for automated processes, the documentation needed, the training needed, the practices. And it's interesting because when we started this, there were no smartphones. So we actually made the decision back in that time, it was 2006, it was just before the iPhone came out, we made the decision, no PDAs, no smartphones when they did come out, because we didn't want to go off down another path. Again, you'll see later that we've set up a working group now to actually look at the impact of mobile devices. Another thing as well that people have said is, why don't you use the ASM guidelines? Well, we can't because it's not an independent recommendation. You can look at it by all means. HMI handbooks and things like this. Even some of the European standards, they're not standards, they're guidelines. So we reference them, but we didn't use them in the standard itself. The standard is broken down into actually 10 sections. And right there you've got the people who are responsible for each of the sections, but it's pretty well across the industry. And for those of you who know the industry, these are some of the stars of the industry who were working on this. But we looked at things like definitions, how to manage the system, ergonomics, as Mikhail mentioned earlier, a big part of it, display styles, user interaction, performance, and so on. The committee itself is now up to about 250 members. And as with 90% of ISA standards, there's about 50 of those people who do any work. So it's typical of standards that you'll have all of these people who want to know about standards, and then when you ask them to do some work, they're like, you know what, I'm busy that day. So you have these dedicated people who work on standards, and I've got to praise them, to help develop these important standards. And then you get people chipping in later on when we do comment rounds and things like this. And the interesting thing as well is that through no design of ours, the breakdowns are pretty good. So we've got producers as a supplier in ISA terminology, users, integrators, and academics, and it's pretty well balanced. So, and that was through no design. The path itself was quite interesting. It's unbelievable how many comments you can get from a 65-page document. We put it out, the first real draft that we thought was seriously the standard came out in 2013, so it was already 7 years in. And we basically said, well, in a standard there are certain things that you should do, and there are certain things that you shall do. And there's a big debate over that, you know, what's a should and what's a shall. So we had to go through and say, well, what do you guys think should be in the standard and what shall be in the standard? And we went around and we had good feedback on that and kind of distilled the standard down to the point where we issued it in June of 2014. And in June of 2014, it passed as a standard. But the other rule of ISA is that when comments come back, you have to address them before you can actually launch the standard. On a 65-page document, we had 1,400 comments. And you have to address every single one of those, get back to the people who wrote them, explain what you think about it, or modify the standard and then reissue it. So we went through all of that exercise, and then, excuse me, my throat's getting dry. So we went back through all of that. 34 people had said they approved the standard, but 2 didn't. So again, ISA rules, we had to go back out and solve all of the issues of the comments, put it back out. The 2 people who voted against it changed their votes positive, so we had a unanimous decision. And it became a standard in July of 2015. It was actually launched in September of 2015, so it basically took 2 years to get that cycle completed of all of the comments and getting it out. The interesting thing was, though, that as a chairman, co-chairman, Greg Lehman's the other chairman, we were already getting people from industry calling us and saying, we want to use the standard. So we said, well, yes, you can use it, but you can't say it's a standard yet. You can say the developing standard or the draft standard or whatever. But so industry was already asking us for the standard. So when it came out, we were quite happy to say, go ahead, you can use it now. From the standard perspective, the very first thing that you do is, as with every standard I've been involved with, you have to get common terminology. So one of the things we did was to develop basic definitions, and that took a long time to do, as it always does in standards. It takes a long time to get everyone to consensus, this is what we mean by this, and this is what we mean by that. What's a pop-up? What is a graphic? What's an icon? That kind of thing. So we had to define all of that, and that's the first thing of the standard. But the most important thing is this. It was actually a meeting we were at in Indianapolis several years ago when we finally decided the best way to manage this would be in a lifecycle approach. And so you've got basically a lot of, these are the design and running and operation and putting it out and decommissioning and all that sort of stuff. And then across the top you've got things that, continuous work processes like MOCs, audits, validation, that stuff, that's an ongoing thing. But then the other thing is at the beginning, there, setting up system standards like what's your philosophy, what's the style guide, what are toolkits, so how will things react when you select them on the screen, that kind of thing. What does the style, what's it look like, what kind of a background are you going to have, that kind of thing. What's your philosophy for showing these displays. So the system standards, as I said, they set the foundation. The design is all the hardware and software aspects. Then we have the creation of the HMI as a target platform and the hardware. So what is it going to be? What constitutes an HMI? Is it one of these large screen displays across a wall, or is it just a small operator inside a factory or something? Because it covers the whole gambit from big ethylene cracker walls to a small machine-operated system. And then things like ongoing maintenance, training, how do you make modifications, how do you upgrade a system, that kind of thing, and it's all covered in the standard. I'm not going to go through this, give someone else a chance to talk, but this is in the standard, so I suggest you go and look at it. But basically what we did is we broke it down and said, well, there are activities, objectives, what goes into that stage and what we're expecting out of it. And this is just an example of the system standards. So define the philosophy, so it's the guiding principles for the design. It's independent of platforms, so this is the kind of thing you'd use before you even selected a system supplier. Develop the star guide, so this is what it's going to look like on any platform again. And then you get platform specific down here because it's saying, this is how whatever that widget is going to work on that platform. And then we've got the same for design, same for implementation, same for operation, same for continuous improvement. So they're all in the standards. Just go ahead and look and learn if you need to do that if you're developing an HMI. So the next thing we were at was, way back we had all of these things in the standard, and it made it so cumbersome and so clunky. We decided in the end to make the standard short and punchy. Like I said, this is what you don't do, this is what you do. But then people are like, well, how do I do an HMI philosophy? What does it look like? So we set up these working groups to develop technical reports. And in ISA terminology, a technical report is a lot less onerous than a standard. So you can develop a technical report with a group of people and put different examples in there, and that's where we're at now. So these, in fact, while I was sitting down there, we were already setting up a meeting for the working group 2. So again, we had a section on performance, but it was so detailed and so many, screen display refresh rates, all this kind of stuff. We said, no, we don't want this. We're going to put it into a working group. And then finally, we decided we can't avoid it. Mobile platforms are here, they're coming, they're going to be in the plant. So we set up a working group to say, well, what is the impact of mobile devices now on HMIs? And what is the impact of mobile devices on the standard? ISA has this thing where they go through every 5 years and you refresh the standard. So again, we'll start taking input now, but in 5 years' time when it gets reviewed, then we'll almost certainly have something about mobile devices in there and the impact on the displays. So these have all been set up. We've got working group leaders, and we'll meet again at the spring leaders meeting, which is in June, and the fall leaders meeting, which is in September, and keep the process going. But it's ongoing pretty well every day that we get something on the standard. But I'd encourage you to use it. Encourage you to send feedback as well, because, as I said, it's an ongoing process. Standards are an iterative thing. So if you have any feedback for me after you've read the standard or if you've looked at the standard, then please get in touch. A few examples, coming back to what Mikhail was saying earlier. The human brain deals much better with this kind of thing than that kind of thing. It's much easier for an operator to stand at this side of the room and say, that's a temperature profile, this is kind of the limits that you've got on that temperature profile, than to look at that and say, well, am I in spec, am I out of spec, am I in danger, what's going on? And then coming back, it was great to see Mikhail with these kinds of display. There's another organization I'm involved with called the Center for Operator Performance, and they're looking at what color should the background be. Sorry, press the wrong one there. What color should the background be? People have said, it's a grey background and grey vessels, but operators have said, we don't like that. So what should it be? This one shows pale blue. Seems that that's becoming more favourable now, but maybe that isn't the right thing. So we're doing some research on that now. So this is an example of the KPI level, the higher level, coming down to task level. And again, this is a thing where you've got like a radar diagram inside a furnace or a tank. You've got a profile there on a column, same thing that we talked about earlier. No reds, no greens, unless they have to be there. Then you come down even further. But again, the whole idea is that if something shows up, the operator should do something about it. That's my philosophy, and the philosophy that we've put in the standard is you shouldn't have extraneous information there that has nothing to do with running the process. And if something comes up there, the operator should do something with it. So thanks. Volunteers are always welcome. Active volunteers, that is, by the way.